The jungle had its own kind of rhythm, a pulse you could feel if you stood still long enough. It wasn't just the chirp of insects or the calls of exotic birds. It was something deeper, like the land itself was alive. I learned that rhythm during my time in Vietnam. I had to. If you didn't, you'd miss the signs. The shift in the wind, the crack of a distant branch, or worse, the sudden deafening silence. Out there, silence wasn't peace. It was the prelude to chaos. It was 1969, the summer of my second tour. I was a sergeant in the U.S. Marine Corps, leading a squad of 10 men near Dong Den Mountain deep in Quang Nam Province. By then, I was no stranger to the jungle. I had survived firefights with the Viet Cong, endless nights of monsoon rains, and the kind of heat that felt like it was trying to cook you alive. But nothing, not the war, not the jungle, not even the worst nightmares that followed me home, could have prepared me for what we faced out there. We were patrolling a stretch of jungle on Hill 868 near Dong Den, part of an operation to locate enemy supply caches rumored to be hidden in the area. The mountain was notorious, even among the locals. They called it Nui Jen, the Black Mountain, a place where, they said, even the spirits refused to linger. The stories ranged from old myths to whispered warnings about strange creatures in the woods. We chalked it up to local superstition. Hell, there were plenty of places in Vietnam that had their own ghost stories. But Dong Den had a feeling about it, something you couldn't quite shake. That morning, the jungle was alive with its usual noise, a cacophony of cicadas, bird calls, and the rustle of unseen creatures in the underbrush. We moved single file through the dense greenery, weapons ready, sweat soaking our fatigues. The squad was a mix of old hands and fresh faces. Corporal Martinez, my point man, was as sharp as they came, a street kid from Chicago who had a knack for spotting trouble before it found us. Then there was Keen, a wide-eyed farm boy from Iowa who still carried a photo of his high school sweetheart in his breast pocket. He was only 19. God, he didn't even shave yet. We had been out for 3 days, and the deeper we went into the jungle, the more it felt like we were being watched. At first, it was just a feeling, a prickling at the back of my neck. Then we started noticing the signs, broken branches high up in the trees, deep gouges in the bark, footprints in the mud that were too large to belong to any man. Martinez joked that it was just a big monkey. Maybe a chimp got loose from someone's zoo, he said with a grin. But the tracks were too big for that, too heavy. By the time we reached the foothills of Dong Den, the air had changed. It wasn't just the humidity, it was the smell. A thick, musky stench that clung to everything, like wet fur and rotting vegetation. I felt it in my gut before I could process it. Something was wrong. "Eyes up," I said, my voice low. "We're not alone out here." The men tensed, their chatter fading into silence. We moved cautiously, every sound amplified in the stillness. Then, out of nowhere, the jungle went completely quiet. No birds, no insects, nothing. I raised my fist to signal a halt, my heart hammering in my chest. "You smell that?" Martinez whispered. "Yeah," I said, scanning the trees. "I smell it." Before anyone could respond, we heard it, a low, guttural growl that seemed to vibrate through the ground. It wasn't like anything I'd ever heard before. Not a tiger, not a bear. It sounded wrong. The men looked at me, their eyes wide with fear. I swallowed hard, gripping my rifle tighter. And then it happened. The jungle erupted in a blur of motion. Massive, shadowy shapes came crashing through the underbrush, their guttural screeches piercing the air. At first, I thought it was an ambush. I shouted for the men to form up, to fire, but what came at us wasn't human. The creatures were enormous, standing at least 7 feet tall, their bodies covered in matted reddish-brown fur. They moved on 2 legs but hunched forward, their long arms dragging through the dirt as they charged. Their faces were hideous, a grotesque blend of ape and man, with wide, flat noses, sharp teeth, and eyes that burned with a primal, almost intelligent rage. "Light 'em up!" I shouted, and the jungle exploded with gunfire. Bullets tore into the creatures, but they didn't stop. One of them lunged at Keen, its powerful arms wrapping around him like a vice. He screamed as it lifted him off the ground, slamming him into a tree with bone-crushing force. Blood splattered the foliage, and I fired, emptying my clip into its chest. The thing let out a deafening roar before collapsing, but there were more of them. Too many. Martinez went down next, his rifle knocked from his hands as one of the creatures raked its claws across his chest. He managed to pull his sidearm, firing point blank into its face. It staggered back, snarling, but didn't fall. Another grabbed Wilkes, our radio operator, and flung him like a rag doll. I fumbled for a grenade, my hand shaking as I yanked the pin and lobbed it into the thickest part of the melee. The explosion lit up the jungle, the shockwave knocking me off my feet. When I scrambled back up, dazed and ears ringing, I saw several of the creatures lying still, their bodies torn apart. The survivors melted back into the jungle, their howls echoing through the trees. We didn't stop to count the dead. We grabbed Wilkes, who was barely breathing, and hauled ass out of there. Keene was gone. What was left of him wasn't worth mentioning. Martinez limped beside me, blood soaking his shirt, his face pale but determined. When we finally stumbled back into camp, we were met with blank stares and disbelief. No one wanted to hear about giant apes or monsters in the jungle. "Jungle fever," the lieutenant said. "You boys are just seeing things." But the rumors spread anyway. The story of the Batut Rock Apes, as they came to be called, reached someone high up. A month later, I heard whispers that the CIA had taken an interest. They'd sent a squad of Navy SEALs into the jungle tasked with capturing one of the creatures alive. They wanted proof. Or maybe they wanted a weapon. Either way, the squad disappeared. Not a trace was found. No bodies, no gear. Just an empty jungle, as if the earth had swallowed them whole. I don't know what happened to those SEALs, and I don't want to know. But sometimes, late at night, I wonder if those creatures were watching us even as we left Dong Den. I wonder if they were sending a message, one that the jungle understood even if we didn't. Stay out. This is our world. To this day, I can still smell that musky stench, still hear the growls echoing in my nightmares. Whatever those things were, whatever they are, they're still out there, in the deep places of the world where man doesn't belong. And every time I hear a branch snap or catch a whiff of wet fur, my pulse quickens, and I look over my shoulder. Because once you've seen what's out there, you never stop looking.